The street was cloaked in the quiet hush of early evening, the kind of silence that feels almost heavy. Officer Jason Carter sat in his cruiser, parked along Willowbrook Drive in Charleston, South Carolina. It was the kind of neighborhood where the houses stood tall, proud of their red brick and neatly trimmed lawns, where porch lights flickered on one by one as the sun dipped below the horizon. 2 hours left on his shift, and Jason was ready to head home, to a cold cup of coffee and the relief of being off duty. But then he saw the car, a sleek black Audi A8, gliding slowly down the street, creeping to a stop at the stop sign in a way that made every veteran cop's instincts flare. No license plate on the back. The car hesitated just a fraction longer than necessary, inching forward with caution that bordered on hesitation. Something wasn't right. Jason's fingers tightened on the steering wheel. He flicked the patrol car's lights on and reached for the radio. Dispatch, Unit 12. Initiating a traffic stop on a black Audi A8. No plates visible, occupied. The car pulled smoothly to the curb beneath an old oak tree, its broad branches casting mottled shadows on the pavement. Jason stepped out, boots crunching softly on the gravel, eyes sharp and scanning for anything unusual. He approached the driver's window, hand hovering near his holster, but relaxed. The window rolled down before he could reach the door. "Good evening, officer," came the calm, steady voice. Jason stopped short. The woman behind the wheel was nothing like what he'd expected. She was black, her skin smooth despite her apparent age, likely in her late 60s. Short silver hair framed a face that was both graceful and resolute. Her posture was straight, shoulders back, eyes steady and unflinching. Draped over her shoulders was a flowing black robe, the unmistakable garment of a judge. "I'm Judge Lorraine Whitman," she said, offering a slight nod. "This is my vehicle. I'm heading home from the courthouse." Jason blinked, surprised by the unexpected identification. "License and registration, please." Without hesitation, Judge Whitman handed over a worn but neatly kept wallet. Jason pulled out the documents, scanning them carefully. Driver's license, registration, insurance card. Everything appeared in order. "Do you know why I pulled you over, ma'am?" Jason asked, voice low. Jason's words felt heavier than necessary. "Your vehicle matches the description of a stolen car reported earlier today. A black Audi A8 with no plates." Judge Whitman raised an eyebrow. "You can confirm with dispatch. This car is registered to me." Jason walked back to his cruiser and radioed the information in, but his eyes never left her. Seconds stretched, then a soft voice called out from a nearby porch. "That's Judge Whitman," said a middle-aged white woman stepping into the fading light, crossing her arms firmly. "She's my neighbor. That car's hers. Always has been." Jason nodded curtly. "Thank you, ma'am. We've got it handled." But the woman's presence shifted the air, an unspoken reminder that this was no ordinary stop. The radio crackled with a response. No stolen vehicle report matched the VIN. The registration was verified. The name was correct. Everything checked out. Still, Jason didn't return her documents. "Ma'am," he said, stepping toward her window again, "I need you to step out of the vehicle." Her eyes locked with his, steady and unyielding. "Is that a lawful order, officer?" Jason's hand dropped toward his holster. "Yes?" A small group had gathered across the street. Teenagers with phones, their faces lit by the glow of their screens, watching intently. Judge Whitman raised her voice enough to reach them. "I am Judge Lorraine Whitman of the 9th Judicial District. This is my car. You've confirmed it is not stolen." "You are unlawfully detaining me," she said. Jason's stance tightened, his pride wrestling with the evidence before him. The cameras were rolling. The crowd was growing, but his gut and years on the force anchored him in place. "You're violating my rights," she said again, sharper this time. A teenage boy shouted from the crowd, "That's Judge Whitman!" She ain't lying. Phones raised higher, the tension swelling like a storm. Jason's fingers twitched near his holster, but did not draw. A woman whispered from the sidewalk, "She gave my brother probation last year. She's fair. You're messing up." Jason's jaw clenched. The street seemed to hold its breath. Before Jason could speak, a second cruiser rolled in. Officer Marissa Dalton stepped out, her blonde ponytail tight, her eyes scanning the scene. "Jason," she said quietly, "that's Judge Whitman. Let's clear this up." "I'm trying," he answered, voice strained. Judge Whitman rolled up her window slightly, not fully closing it, just enough to keep the night air between them. Her face was calm, but unyielding. Jason retreated back to his cruiser, heart pounding. The quiet neighborhood suddenly transformed into a stage for a battle far bigger than a missing license plate. Jason sat behind the wheel, his pulse hammering in his ears louder than the faint hum of the patrol car's engine. The radio confirmation still echoed through the speakers. No stolen vehicle matched the Audi's VIN. Judge Whitman's name was confirmed. The papers in his hand said it all. But his gut whispered otherwise. He looked up from the documents and caught a flicker of movement from the sidewalk. The small crowd that had gathered had grown larger. Neighbors stepping out of their homes, teenagers leaning against mailboxes, phones raised high, screens glowing in the twilight. The air was thick with quiet murmurs, the kind that ripple into something louder when no one speaks. "Ma'am," Jason's voice was firmer now as he climbed out of the cruiser. "I need you to step out of the vehicle." Judge Whitman's eyes narrowed, unwavering. "Officer Carter, is that a lawful order?" Jason's hand hovered near his holster for a moment longer than necessary before lowering it slowly. "Yes." The judge didn't move. A teenager across the street lifted his phone and hit record. The red light blinked insistently. Jason's heart sank. The crowd's whispers grew louder, blending into a steady drone of anticipation. Some nodded their heads in support. Others exchanged uneasy glances. From the sidelines, a woman's voice rose, clear and unafraid. "She gave my brother probation last year. Fair and just. You're making a mistake, officer." Jason's jaw clenched. The weight of dozens of eyes, many hidden behind screens, pressed down on him. His pride, his years on the force, his training, they all battled against the growing tide of evidence and public scrutiny. Judge Whitman rolled her window down slightly, enough for her words to carry to the crowd. "I am Judge Lorraine Whitman of the 9th Judicial District," she said, voice calm but resolute. "You have confirmed that this is my vehicle. You are unlawfully detaining me." A ripple of agreement spread through the crowd. Jason swallowed hard, taking a deep breath. "I'm just doing my job." From behind him, the second cruiser's engine cut off. Officer Marissa Dalton approached, her presence a quiet contrast to the swelling crowd. "Jason," she said softly, "you know who she is." "This isn't necessary." Jason ran a hand over his face. "I'm trying to clear this up." Marissa's eyes swept the crowd and locked onto his. "Let it go." The tension on the street was now a living thing. Phones continued to record, streams went live, and hashtags began to form in real time. Social media was already lighting up with fragments of the unfolding drama. Suddenly, a shout broke the air. "Hey, step back! You can't just yell at kids!" Jason turned to see a teenage boy standing near the Audi, phone still recording, eyes wide with defiance. Jason's voice rose, "Step back now!" The boy's father appeared on the porch, hands raised in protest. "He's on our property. You don't get to order my son around." Judge Whitman's eyes flicked to the exchange. This is exactly the fear that haunts communities like mine, being treated as threats when we pose no harm. Jason's stomach churned. He glanced again at the judge, who sat tall behind the wheel, steady even as the world around her seemed to swirl out of control. Marissa stepped closer, gently placing a hand on Jason's arm. "You need to back off. This isn't the way." Jason looked down at his trembling hands, realizing how far he had let things escalate. A low murmur swept through the crowd as people whispered about racial profiling, abuse of power, and systemic injustice. The video streams had already amassed thousands of views, their audiences growing by the second. Judge Whitman reached into her glove compartment and produced a second ID, a judicial badge. She held it firmly against the window. Marissa squinted, then nodded. "Everything checks out. We're going to let her go." Jason stood frozen, the crowd's eyes like a spotlight on him. He heard his radio hiss with static, but ignored it. "Jason!" Marissa's voice broke through the noise. "You're done here." But Jason didn't move. In an unexpected moment, Judge Whitman turned off the engine and quietly stepped out of the car. Her robe swayed around her as she stood, hands relaxed at her sides. "This is what it takes for a black woman to be heard," she said, her eyes sweeping the crowd. The phones lowered slowly, replaced by a heavy silence that was anything but peaceful. Jason's hand drifted toward his belt. Marissa's voice cracked across the air. "Don't!" Jason froze. Judge Whitman looked him directly in the eye. "You are not the law. The law is written, studied, and upheld by those who earn the right to interpret it. You enforce it, but only if you remember what it means." The crowd exploded in a mixture of cheers and whispers. The night transformed into a turning point, not just for Jason and Judge Whitman, but for the city watching. By sunrise, the city of Charleston was no longer just watching. It was talking. The clip from the previous night's traffic stop had spread like wildfire. Barely 5 minutes long, yet powerful enough to ignite debates across newsrooms, social media feeds, and kitchen tables. Headlines blared, "Judge Whitman wrongly detained." "Is racial profiling alive in Charleston?" And "Police accountability under fire after viral traffic stop." The hashtags #Justice for Whitman and #Stop Racial Profiling trended nationwide. Inside the Columbia Police Department, the mood was grim and silent. The usual banter and burnt coffee smells in the morning briefing room were replaced by cold tension. Chief Harold Evans entered, the weight of the news evident in his eyes. Without a word, he slid a printed headline across the table to Officer Jason Carter. "This is what we're facing today," he said, voice low but steady. Jason stared at the page. "South Carolina judge stops police in viral traffic incident." His name wasn't in the headline, but he could feel the blame settling on his shoulders. He sat quietly in a corner, trying to shrink beneath the weight of it all. Officer Marissa Dalton, who had stepped in last night to calm the situation, avoided his gaze. She stood silently nearby, a quiet reminder that even within the force, sides were being taken. "Have you filed your incident report?" Chief Evans asked. "Yes, sir," Jason replied, voice barely audible. The chief nodded slowly. "The footage doesn't match your report." Jason said nothing. "We're initiating an internal review. Effective immediately, you're on administrative leave." The room fell silent. Jason's heart pounded. No protests, no arguments, just the cold reality of consequences. Across town, Judge Lorraine Whitman sat alone in her modest kitchen, the early morning light filtering through white curtains. The black robe was replaced by a simple gray sweater and jeans, but the fatigue lingered deep in her eyes. Her phone buzzed constantly, Messages from friends, colleagues, reporters, even strangers thanking her for her courage. She didn't answer. Instead, she watched the video again. Watched the look in Jason's eyes, the pride, the stubbornness, the bias she'd faced so many times before. It cut deeper than the moment itself, because she'd always known the system saw her not as a judge, but as a black woman, a threat, an outsider, someone to be questioned endlessly. A framed photo on her kitchen wall caught her eye. It was her father, a police officer in Charleston during the 1970s. He had warned her often, "The robe doesn't change how they see you, Lorraine. You have to be twice as good just to be half as respected." She had believed she could outgrow that. She was wrong. Later that morning, Amy, her trusted clerk, stopped by with the docket for the day. Nervous but loyal, Amy approached carefully, like stepping through a minefield. "Do you think you should go in?" Amy asked. Judge Whitman looked up, a faint smile touching her lips. "If I don't, they'll say I'm afraid." Amy nodded, biting her lip. "You're not afraid. You're tired." Lorraine folded her hands. "Then I'm tired and ready." That evening, outside the police department, a small protest had gathered. About 100 people, their signs demanding accountability. Power doesn't equal permission. Who judges the police? Photos from the body cam were pasted on wooden placards, the image of Judge Whitman standing firm, now iconic. Inside, Jason sat alone at his desk, packing his things into a cardboard box. The chants echoed faintly through the windows, his name shouted a few times in frustration and anger. He wasn't angry like before, mostly confused. He'd followed what he thought was right, what his gut told him, what years of training drilled into him. Now, it felt wrong. On his desk was a photo from last summer, his wife and daughter, toes buried in sand at Myrtle Beach, laughing. How would he explain this? How could he admit the mistake without sounding like a villain? Marissa knocked gently on the doorframe. "You okay?" Jason shrugged. "I didn't want it to go like that." She leaned against the wall. "Did you ever think maybe what feels normal to you is what needs fixing?" Jason looked up, tired eyes meeting hers. "Yeah, I'm starting to." But introspection wasn't enough. Not yet. The story of Judge Whitman and Officer Carter was no longer just theirs. It belonged to a city grappling with history, bias, and the raw edges of justice. The courtroom was a modest room tucked inside a municipal building not far from where the stop had taken place. No marble columns, no flashing press lights, just stiff-backed chairs, a long table, and the buzz of whispered conversations. Cameras were set up shoulder to shoulder, capturing every moment for a public eager for answers. Judge Lorraine Whitman sat upright at the witness table. Gone was the judicial robe. Today, she was a witness, not a judge. Her hands were folded, her gaze steady but not unyielding. The room hushed as Officer Jason Carter entered through a side door, his navy jacket and khakis a stark contrast to the uniform he usually wore. No applause, no sneers, just the weight of expectation pressing down. The 5-member oversight committee took their seats, their role clear: review the body cam footage, assess the officer's conduct, and decide if disciplinary action was warranted. The video played silently on a large monitor. No narration, no commentary, just the moment-by-moment reality. Jason's voice, tense and clipped. Judge Whitman's calm but firm refusals. The mounting crowd, the subtle gestures. Then, a 40-second gap. A sudden silence where the audio cut out. Vera Lindell, a retired judge from Charleston and chair of the panel, adjusted her glasses and looked directly at Jason. "Officer Carter, can you explain why the body cam audio dropped during that critical moment?" Jason cleared his throat, swallowing the lump in his throat. I don't know. Might have been a malfunction. Are you aware, Vera continued, that departmental logs show your hand brush the mute toggle at precisely that time? Jason hesitated, then nodded slowly. Yes, ma'am. A murmur rippled through the room. One committee member, a sharp-eyed black attorney, stood and said, "So the footage goes silent the moment things escalate. That's either extremely convenient or deeply concerning." Jason's eyes flicked down. Judge Whitman remained composed, watching quietly. When it was her turn, Lorraine spoke not to defend herself, but to remind everyone what was at stake. The badge does not grant permission to ignore facts. It carries the responsibility to honor them, she said. Every day, I decide who deserves leniency or punishment, knowing the system is already tilted in ways many refuse to admit. That night, it tilted again. I bore that weight, despite doing nothing wrong. Outside the building, a few dozen supporters gathered behind barricades, holding signs and chanting. The protest had shrunk from the previous night's swelling crowds, but the tension remained taut. Inside, the committee took 30 minutes to deliberate. When they returned, Vera did not mince words. The panel finds Officer Carter engaged in conduct unbecoming of his position. His actions were excessive, unsupported by evidence, and suggest a pattern inconsistent with departmental standards. Jason blinked, the verdict settling on him like a cold weight. We recommend a 60-day unpaid suspension and mandatory bias retraining, pending final departmental approval. Any further violations will result in immediate termination. Gasps and murmurs filled the room. Some believed the punishment was too lenient, others too harsh. Judge Whitman said nothing. She stood, gathered her coat, and thanked the committee. Outside, a reporter thrust a microphone toward her. Judge Whitman, do you feel justice was served? She paused, searching for the right words. I don't believe in justice as a moment, she said softly. Justice is a practice, a daily commitment. Tonight was just one part of it. Across the street, Jason stood alone beneath a tree, watching cars pass by, the weight of the decision sinking in. His suspension would begin the next day. No badge, no gun, just time. Marissa approached quietly. You good? She asked. Jason didn't answer immediately. Number, but I think I'm supposed to be honest. She nodded slowly. Maybe that's where it starts. The city wasn't waiting for him to catch up. Judge Lorraine Whitman sat quietly in her chambers at the Richland County Courthouse. Morning light spilled softly across the polished floor, warming the edges of her heavy oak desk. A neat stack of letters lay before her, some handwritten notes from strangers, others emails from clerks, law students, and retired judges from across the country. Words like strength, grace, and clarity appeared over and over, messages that reminded her of the impact her quiet courage had made. Yet the words that lingered deepest were written on the bottom of a folded envelope from someone she had never met. You reminded me that staying calm doesn't mean staying silent. She read the sentence 3 times, feeling the weight settle inside her like a quiet truth she had always known but rarely voiced. At 9 a.m., the courtroom door opened. Her first case of the day was a probation review. A teenage boy, no more than 17, shuffled into the room accompanied by his public defender. His shirt was tucked in too tightly, his hands fidgeted nervously, and his eyes darted to the floor and back again. She recognized the look, a mixture of fear, shame, and hope, because she had seen it countless times before. This part of her job was hidden from most, the delicate task of deciding who deserved mercy, who needed guidance, and when the system had to hold someone accountable. She glanced over the boy's file. School suspensions, A minor theft charge, a single-parent home. Nothing new under the law, but everything personal. "Tell me," she said softly, "do you understand why you're here today?" The boy nodded, voice cracking slightly. "Because I made a mistake." Lorraine paused, allowing the silence to stretch just a moment longer. "That's true," she replied gently. "But it's not the whole answer. You're here because you were caught. The real question is, do you understand the kind of man you are becoming?" His eyes dropped, searching the floor. "I don't want to be in this room again," he whispered. Her gaze softened, filled with both resolve and empathy. Belief in change is a start, but it's not enough. She closed the folder on his file with quiet finality. "I'm continuing your probation. No extension, no jail time. But next time, there won't be another conversation. Understand?" "Yes, ma'am," he replied. A faint smile lifted his lips as relief washed over his tense shoulders. In the back of the courtroom, his mother exhaled deeply, hands clenched together in silent gratitude. For a brief moment, the room was filled not with judgment, but with hope. Fragile, but real. Later, after the court session ended, Lorraine returned to her black Audi, parked in the same spot where it all began on Willowbrook Drive. She sat behind the wheel and stared into the rearview mirror. The flashing lights, the suspicion, and the weight of a badge that sometimes failed to protect lingered in her mind. She thought about justice, how easily it could shift, depending on who wielded power and how. Meanwhile, across town, Jason Carter sat alone in his modest kitchen. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across a blank notebook with the title, Bias Reflection Assignment. He had struggled with the task, writing a few lines only to crumple them and toss them aside. Finally, he penned a single honest sentence. "I didn't see her. Not as a person, not as a judge, not even as someone with a name." He continued writing, not to undo what had happened, but because silence was no longer safe. Not for him, and not for anyone. Days later, outside the courthouse, a group of high school students walked past, carrying clipboards. One boy paused and looked up at the building, then waved enthusiastically at the window. "Judge Whitman," he called out, "we saw your video in class." She smiled gently, the warmth of their recognition settling like a balm. "Good or bad?" the boy asked. "Both," she replied softly. "But it made us talk," he said with a grin. "And that was everything. Because sometimes all it takes is one voice to start a conversation, to ripple out and inspire thousands more. One voice, speaking calmly but firmly, reminding a city, a community, a system, that power means nothing without responsibility, and respect is most powerful when it is hardest to give." Lorraine looked out at the street, the faces of the next generation marching forward with questions, hope, and the courage to demand change. The journey was far from over, but the direction had shifted. And sometimes, that's enough.